Jeff, talk a little bit more about your expertise in this particular area.
Well, being that I've done all this direct mail in the mortgage industry for 20 years, and I own my own mortgage company, and I used to spend $200,000 a month on direct mail. I mean, I've learned a lot of things about making the phones ring, but even more important is closing the loans. And what used to frustrate me at my mortgage company was I would send 100 phone calls to a loan officer that I had named Ron. And Ron, at the end of the month, would close 20 loans at $5,000 average revenue loan. So I'd make $100,000 off, you know, $10,000 worth of phone calls that I sent Ron. And then I'd have another loan officer sitting right next to him taking the same phone calls, 100 inbound phone calls, and Carrie would close 2 loans. And I would make $10,000, and I spent $10,000, and I lost money on Carrie, and I was making a fortune on Ron. So I started looking at, you know, my average closing ratio for my office was around 10%. Actually, it wasn't quite that good. I'd like to say 10%. It was probably more like 7%. And I had a few guys and gals closing at 20 and a few closing at 2, and I was always trying to improve that. In fact, one year I took a look at something. I said, if I can move my average closing ratio on my calls from 7% to 8%, if I can just move the needle 1% on my closing ratio, I personally would have made an additional $1 million in income that year by moving my closing ratio by 1%. So I started doing all kinds of work on personality profiling, and I worked with a business consultant. His name's James Karasek. I might get him on this call later. But James and I started putting together these mortgage personality profiles where we could start to identify, hey, here's the personality that can take an incoming call over the telephone, build rapport, warm up to them, and close the lead. So we kind of started identifying certain personality types that were really good taking incoming calls and closing them, and we'd identify the ones that were not. So we built this whole hiring system that really made me a lot of money in my mortgage company. And I don't know, I kind of forgot about it since I closed my company down. You know, we've never brought this up before, but I started talking to some of my mortgage clients, and they're having the same challenges where, you know, one guy just got 100 phone calls on his FHA campaign and closed 7 loans, and another guy closed, you know, 27 loans. And what's the difference? Well, the difference is the loan officer taking the call. Some of it's, you know, well, we've got places to do FHA loans below 640 FICO, so the product is important. And one guy's a banker, one guy's a broker, one's closing loans in 3 weeks, and one's closing loans in 3 months. So product does have something to do with your closing ratio, but the most important thing, you know, that I found is the types of loan officers you're hiring. So I wanted to go through some, you know, some information about things that I spent hundreds of hours working on, and maybe I can share with some clients to up their closing ratio and hire better loan officers. So.
Well, right now I've got a poll up, and I just want to get that out there for anybody that has just been on for the marketing aspects. If you'd like to be contacted by one of Jeff's marketing representatives, go ahead and cast your vote now on when you'd like to be contacted so that they can get to the people that are the most interested right away. And if you're not interested, we're not going to bother you with this follow-up opportunity, but go ahead and cast your vote, and I'll close that poll in about 10 seconds. While I'm doing that, Jeff, I want you to give the audience that stuck around or is signed on for this particular session, you've been a master interviewer over the years of bringing on top quality closers. What are maybe, you know, 1 or 2 of your best interview questions that really help you define, without even taking the personality assessment, what are a couple of critical indicator questions that you ask during an interview to know whether or not you got, you know, a closer or you got a, you know, a deadbeat that's just not going to be a final contestant on the opportunities that you bring into your office?
Well, I'll give you one that I think is super important. I mean, your biggest competition on trying to get a refinance borrower to close their loan with you is going to be their originating lender. I mean, everybody knows they can call their lender back and refinance their loan, and typically they'll do it for less fees and probably a pretty aggressive rate. So that's our biggest competition out there, is them calling their lender back and trying to refinance their loan there for a lower amount. So one of the questions I'd ask in the interview would be, playing like I'm the borrower, why would I want to do my loan with, direct funding? Your interest rate's high and your fees are, $3,500 when I can go back to my lender and get, the same interest rate with no fees or a streamlined refinance. That would be the number one question I'd ask them, to see if they can overcome the objection of your rate is high and your fees are high. And I would see how that loan officer answered that question. Some of them, would have no answer for it, and some of them would come back with great information about comparing, actual good faith estimates and, looking at the lifetime of the loan. I mean, I just see how they answered that basic objection, because that is something that's going to come up on the phone. And let me say something, Dave, about that. There's two loan officers in the world. Okay, there's your self-gen loan officers that are out calling on realtors trying to get purchase loans. And typically they're pretty good salespeople in person. They typically know how to do loans very well. They have maybe some processing background. They understand, debt-to-income ratio and how to run DU and manipulate DU, and they're really good at that. And those loan officers that work by referral, if the real estate agent says, hey, buyer, here's my loan officer. He's great. He'll take good care of you. We want to get your deal closed and get you in your new home. Let me introduce you to John. Well, the loan officer, John, has already been referred with high accolades about how great he is, so he really doesn't have to build any trust with that borrower. He just has to do a good job, take their application, quote a rate, fees, and he can get that loan. The other loan officer is the marketing lead loan officer, who has to take an incoming call or an internet lead and warm up to that borrower, build rapport, ask a lot of information, do the discovery on the borrower, and then quote, rates and fees and try to close the loan. My experience is those are two totally different people, and sometimes the marketing loan officer that's taking all these inbound phone calls, he has a huge closing ratio on leads, but he can't go talk to a realtor and get their business. He's not, or she's not, real good at that. And vice versa, the loan officer that's phenomenal doing loans, they might be doing 15 loans a month, all purchase business, all referral. You put them on an incoming phone call where the question comes in, what's your rate? And they choke. They don't know how to convert those calls, build rapport, and close to get that into a closed loan. So, there's some loan officers out there that are really good hybrids that can do both sides of it, but my experience is you're usually good at one or the other, and you need training on both sides of it to be good at both sides of it.
That's great. Well, you've put together a couple of things in here in terms of how to increase performance of your team. You said that you'd give access to the participants on the webinar to this assessment tool that you've been building, and to get a hold of that information, Jeff, or they just need to call your office?
Yeah, I can provide, copies of this information if they want to, take a look closer. And we've got some more information to send about our little hiring package and our mortgage personality profiling. James Karasek, one of my sales managers in here, is kind of leading up that division of our company. So they'll be talking to him, and he can send some more information to him.
Well, let's just get into these specific tips and maybe give a little bit of an overview of what you've come up with in terms of closing ratios on leads, using direct mail, and just maybe some benchmark factors that managers and broker owners should be aware of.
Yeah, so the average closing ratio on leads is 6%. If you want to look at internet leads, SEO, telemarketing, TV and radio, and direct mail. Direct mail has always been known as the highest closing ratio because these people are calling you. They got a letter in the mail, they read it, they're interested, they're calling you. So the average closing ratio in direct mail is typically higher than everything else, but the cost per call is also higher. So it's important to treat those leads with, the time and energy that they demanded to get them to close. So I've got here up on the screen, mailing 10,000 letters and getting 100 phone calls. Obviously, closing is 6% versus 12%. What does that mean to you in profitability? And it's a huge number. An extra $30,000 in profit if you can double your closing ratio by hiring the right loan officers and getting them trained and doing the right letters and direct mail. But so we can help improve their closing ratio by just hiring better loan officers with a personality that can close leads.
You also just talked about a simple thing that people can do a better job of is just answering calls. But you've also got some strategies on how to improve upon that with some technology as well. But I know there's a lot of content on this particular slide, Jeff, but talk about how you've been able to improve the call response or the call answering in your
Well, we have toll-free tracking numbers that record all the phone calls and send you an email every time you get a call. So if you do miss a call, because it's common, you've got all your loan officers on the phone and a call comes in and they go to voicemail and sometimes they don't leave a message. So we've got, call tracking software we can offer that'll email them every time they get a call with a copy of the call recording. You can hear how your loan officers are doing on the phone call, pick up their caller ID, call them back. You'd be surprised how many of my clients miss 20% of their phone calls. They don't even answer them. And, 20 missed calls at a 10% closing ratio, you missed 2 loans for 10 grand in revenue. I mean, that'll pay for your whole mail campaign. So we spend a lot of time training our clients on how to set up their phone system to answer all the calls. Don't miss calls. That's important.
And this is an example of one of the printouts that comes with your call tracking service where they can actually go in there and listen to the call recording and see the caller ID and then use it for training purposes, which is one of the things that you've said is the best thing about call recording. It's not to police the loan officers, but more to train them from their mistakes and missed opportunities.
Yeah, so this list just shows every phone call you got, what day and time it came in, the caller ID, the person. Some of them have names and addresses of the person who called, how long the call was, and it's a good report to look at to make sure you're managing these leads. I mean, if you're going to spend money on leads, there is an aspect of time invested in making sure these leads close, whether it's listening to phone calls, watching the calls, coaching the loan officers. I mean, it's not something that just, you send the mailer out and you make 50 grand on a $5,000 mailer. I mean, there's some effort that needs to go in to properly manage all these leads and calls and loan officers. But I can give some people some shortcuts on the most important things that I worked on through the years. So,
well, you've also just talked about, or you've shared a very sensitive issue, which is taking leads away and kind of recycling those leads or putting an expiration on leads. Talk a little bit more about how you've done that with top salespeople. After you've given them, a good dosage of leads and they're not closing them because they've gotten a little bit comfortable or lazy. How have you, taken that and not, ticked off your top sales professionals?
Well, I think just putting an expiration date on the leads is important. Don't let these loan officers think that, they took 100 inbound phone calls and they only closed 5 loans. I guarantee there's another 10 to 15 loans sitting in those leads, and if they're not following up with them and you don't see movement and engagement in phone conversations and emails, I let the loan officer know, hey, you've got this lead for 7 days. If you don't, pull credit and get a commitment, we're going to take this lead away from you and give it to someone else to work. And any good salesperson hates for a lead to be taken away and then closed by another loan officer, so it tends to put a lot more motivation to make sure they're on top of these leads. They're calling them, they're emailing them. They're not just leaving one voicemail and then, walking away from this $100 phone call that came in. So putting an expiration date on leads, it can be a great way to improve your closing ratio.
I also love your third strategy here, which is kind of like what we call the biggest loser strategy. And if you're below the line, you're on the bubble, and you do have to have that, that watermark just so people know when they're below the line and when they're on the cut mark. So talk a little bit more about how you've done that, and how much grace do you give somebody when they, or maybe getting off to a slow start, or going through a life challenge that's causing them to be less productive at work.
Yeah, that could be a whole hour-long conversation about that. But in general, it's just important to, before you hire these people to take your expensive leads and you're going to make this big investment, let's run this DISC mortgage personality profile on these loan officers and make sure that they've got the personality type that can build rapport and close over the telephone. Because if they can't, I don't want you to ever hire Lisa and Jack on this list that are closing 1 or 3 loans out of 100 inbound phone calls. Get rid of those low profitability loan officers that, that can't close. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I can go into this in more detail at a later time, but it's pretty obvious. You want to keep your best closers, and some of the best mortgage companies out there that work leads have the leads first delivered to the top closers, and then, the overflow calls go to the lower percentage rate closers. So it kind of encourages, these loan officers to work these leads and close them.
Great. So as we wrap up here, Jeff, talk about these last couple strategies in terms of the letter from the president and how you've been able to pull that off, and then just the idea about scheduling follow-up phone calls and how profitable that's been for you.
Yeah, it's funny, back when I used to mail this letter, President Bush was in office, and they used to laugh when they got the letter. Oh, President Bush is mailing me a letter. Or is there really a Jeff Bush at this company, and are you really the president? It was kind of funny. But I used to mail this letter out to every person who called our office, because what I found is a lot of borrowers that called our office and gave us their Social Security number so we could run their credit never heard from us again. And it was really discouraging to find that out. So I used to mail this letter, and I would track how many phone calls I got back from borrowers saying, hey, no one ever got back to me. And then I would pin those calls on whichever loan officer it was. And, a lot of times it was like one loan officer that was just being kind of lazy, not calling people back, or, maybe they ran their credit and they didn't qualify, so they just decided not to call the person back. But, we had rules that we always had to follow up with the customer in some fashion and let them know, why they were getting the loan or not getting the loan. So the letter from the president just worked really well for me to kind of get a pulse on, make sure we're on top of these leads.
And then just phone calls, Jeff, is there anything specific about these 2-week follow-up phone calls that you found to be profitable?
Well, a lot of times the incoming call comes in and the person gets rates and fees, and then they go back and shop it through their bank and try to see if they can get a better loan. It just happens, just the other day to one of my clients where, the prospect goes back to their lender, thinks they're going to get a better deal, and then, 60 days later the lender still hasn't moved their loan forward at all because they're so busy, or the rates went up. So it just always helps to call back through your leads. 2 weeks later, 30 days later, 60 days later, there's always people that change their mind and might decide to move forward with you. So just putting those calls out there and make sure that it's not, we didn't close them on the first call, so we're just going to forget about them. Keep them in your database and keep calling them.
Great. And then I'm going to throw up one last poll for those of you that are still on the line with us as we wrap up here. Please go ahead and cast your response to this. We're just kind of curious of how many loan officers that you have inside of your office or offices. And the last two little tips, Jeff, were number one, listening to phone calls and doing sales training with your staff, and then having a rework team. Would you talk through those specific strategies?
So the rework team, I had, at my office, we had 25 loan officers, and I think I had 2 people on the rework team. And after the loan officers had gone through the leads and said that there's nothing there, these people aren't getting a loan, I would typically give all those leads to 2 people and have them start calling and staying in touch with these people. And it was, magic. Every month I would get, 8 or 9 extra funded loans out of all these leads that the rest of the loan officers said were dead. And I was actually paying the rework team a little bit higher commission because they were having to make all outbound calls, not getting any incoming direct mail calls. And it was amazing. Every month I would get 8 or 9 funded loans for free, marketing I already spent money on, just from a loan officer calling back, and they would say something like they were the manager and saw that you'd called a month ago and never moved forward with the loan. What happened? And a lot of times it was, I didn't like the loan officer I talked to, or they didn't call me back, or it was amazing. The rework team is always important to have it inside if you're buying a lot of leads.
Great. Well, if everybody can go ahead and cast their vote, we're going to go ahead and close up that poll and wrap up the presentation. But Jeff, any final words in terms of the marketing strategies we've discussed or the recruiting strategies that you've just shared with us?
Yeah, this is the most important thing of hiring loan officers that can close leads as far as I'm concerned, as far as my offer to you. I am so confident that my DISC personality profile that has a lot of mortgage information built into it is accurate, that I think I can predict the best loan officers in your office for closing leads without knowing them, without ever talking to them, without you telling me anything. So this is the offer that I want to make. Is I want you to call us and sign up to run this mortgage DISC personality profile for a group of your loan officers. I don't care if it's 3 people or 5 or 20. If they fill out this personality profile, I will be able to guess who your best closers are without even knowing them, just from this personality profile. So if I can do that, if I can accurately pick out, hey, you've got 10 loan officers that took my personality profile test, here's your top 3 closers. If this test is that accurate, then you should be using it as a screening tool moving forward, and don't hire any loan officers to work leads unless their personality, it's not really a test, it's more of a personality profile, I think, to make it all legal. I will be able to identify who can build rapport and who can close just from running them through this personality profile. And I got to the point where I really stopped doing second interviews. If they made it through my personality profile and then I met with them in one interview, I would hire them, and that thing was way more accurate than whatever interview questions I could ask her, because everyone's a salesperson in the interview, right? So my offer is to have some of these mortgage companies that are on the phone with us have me personality profile their sales team and see if I can pick out who the best closers are just from the results of the personality profile. And if it's that accurate, I would not hire anyone without using this thing. I mean, it got to the point, like I said, it was more accurate than what I could pick out of them on an interview. So I'd love to talk to some guys about hiring loan officers that can close leads. And again, James Karasek, my sales manager, is going to go through in more detail. It costs anywhere from $50 to $100. I think I ran out of time on a lot of the slides I wanted to go through on this. But again, if they want more information on hiring loan officers, email me, and James or myself will follow up and give them more details on this.
Great. Well, for everybody that's still on the phone or on the webinar, 888-212-4343. That's the number to call. Or you can email Jeff directly at jeffbush@overflowworks.com. Jeff, we thank you so much for your exciting interview, and this is great information for anybody that wants to grow and scale their mortgage business. And if you're looking to increase your marketing response rates and grow your practice and business, please be sure to call Jeff at 888-212-4343. Have a great afternoon, everybody.